So I think in traditional Advaita, the way that they would teach beingness, which to me is the same as I am or amness, if you want to totally take out the I, be very fundamental about it. So what that means is, I don't know what that means. So what the way they would traditionally speak about it is that it's the first manifestation. Is the I am. And I think Ramana Maharshi is famously quoted for saying that beingness, or I am, appears from the left side of the heart. And Nisargadatta and Maharashi recommended that you go back to that original I am. Like go back to the first appearance in this life. So I think that it goes, the body appears and then I am appears. And so it's kind of really spectacular, this image. You kind of have to be a bit flexible in the mind with this, like just imagine it more like poetry than like scientific fact. So when they say like it appears in the left side of the mind, and the left side of the mind, left side of the heart, like, so it seems to be this finite spot, the left side of the heart. So it seems to be this finite spot that beingness comes into. That's something that you can grab hold of. But actually, it's a bit like a fractal when you look at it, because when you begin to go into the I am, which is the left side of the heart, which maybe is the center of the chest. I don't really know anatomy. Maybe just here, the left side of the heart. I just imagine it in this area. So it feels like a finite spot, but when you go into it, it's like a fractal, because actually it is infinite. It isn't finite. So that beingness, which appears to be the left side of the heart, is actually everywhere and everything, and doesn't exist in the body. It seemingly exists in the body, but it's also simultaneously everywhere. So it's like the body is everywhere, and it's also seemingly in the body at the left side of the heart. So maybe that's what the title means, the unbroken heart. And it is unbroken. It's never had its heart broken. It's never cried. It's never been upset about something. It's never rejected anything. It's just there, beaming away as love, this alive presence, which is everywhere and nowhere, which is all things and no things. When identification with the person happens, like there's an identification that the body is you, that the thoughts are you, that the feelings are you, that the consciousness is you, that the experiences are you, the memories are you, the ideas are you. Whereas actually none of that is who you are. Those are phenomena that are arising and coming and going and constantly changing and being updated and transforming. What the identification does is it kind of pulls all these things together and makes it into this ball and puts it inside the body and makes it feel like it's you. And the source of this identification has an agitation to it. it always feels like there's something not quite right. So no matter what it gets, whether it becomes like a Hollywood actress or travels the world or becomes the president or has 10 children, whatever its fantasies are, there's always this agitation that there's something not quite right. And which is true, because there is a lie that's happening in your experience, and the lie is that who I am is a personality structure, whereas who you are is beingness, is this beingness and this empty looking, which are one and the same thing actually. But we can kind of separate them out for speaking purposes. And that's so beautiful, that realization, but for most people that's hidden their whole life. And they're trying to maintain an identity of themselves, which is always changing. So this identity of somebody that's a good girl, that's a bad girl, that is a successful woman, an unsuccessful woman, a strong man, a weak man, an abused person, an abuser. All these identities that it's trying to hold on to, even if they're painful, and make a you out of it, a solid you that is going to get things, that does achieve things, that is successful, that is something to the world. And without that, most people would feel lost, because that's what they've always been taught they have to be. They have to be someone. They have to be someone for other people, for society. They have to be someone in order to survive. So they don't know, they have no sense of something bigger, that who you are is something much bigger and wider and spacious about that. So when there's an identification with all these things that are an impossibility, there's always fear attached to it. There's always an agitation, which is deeper than all the emotions. It's a seeking energy, which is below all the emotions. And it makes the emotions very solid and very real, and creates all these extrapolated thoughts. So when you become really attached to something, then there's fear of losing it. This fear of getting it. This fear of not being worthy of it. And then there can be all types of complex thinking around that. That could even turn into hatred, like hatred of another that might steal it. Could even be turned into like hatred of refugees or hatred of immigrants. They might steal it. But underneath that arises from a seeking energy. And there's emotions that are arising. Emotions are kind of natural for the body, but then they get exacerbated, if that's the right word, by the stories that come from the seeking. So for example, if you have a really nice house by the ocean, maybe a fear that the ocean is rising or something is a natural fear, and then this leads you to do something, put sandbags down, dig holes or ditches, build walls in order to stop that happening. And that can be a natural flow of the body. When there's identification with it, there is the belief that you will lose yourself in losing your house. Like your house becomes part of your identity. And so it will then wake you up in the middle of the night with fear. There'll be paranoia about it, constant measuring of the sea. So it sort of exacerbates it, like makes it bigger, makes it more real. When really the truth is peace is, the freedom that you're looking for is in every moment, it's in presence. And then there is ups and downs in life, that is part of life. And we can transform the body-mind mechanism, we can work with it, we can expand it, we can give it more positive schemas and ideas about itself, and it can expand, but that's not your savior. Most people believe that the personality structure is your savior, is their savior, so themself is them savior. And that's true in a way, but it's not the personality structure that's the savior, it's the big self, that which is beyond the personality structure. So most people are always looking in what they do, and then they feel disappointed, like I've failed, I haven't done it right, and that's why I'm unhappy. Most people just end up, when they're in their 30s or 40s, just really stressed. It's like so much pressure being someone. And then they begin to get into this subject, like a meltdown happens, and they begin to look for something more. Because there's another part of you which is never affected by anything. If the house gets destroyed by the sea, there's another part of you that's so still and free and embracing that. And it's kind of bringing these two together. This personality structure and this freedom, and not, there needs to be a certain amount of identification, but just not this total identification that totally believes it's the person, and this is me, and my freedom is found in me. It's like holding them both. Like at first, maybe you have to go to the absolute. Like if you watch my videos in the beginning, I was so extreme, like maybe there has to be like a going to the absolute extreme, but then it's coming back to this middle way that consciousness, life, no thing, everything is having a personal experience. And then this changes the person, makes the person more relaxed and more happy and more easy and more flowing with everything. But the person is no longer looking for freedom in itself. Freedom is who you are. Freedom is what is. It's so beautiful. And that's such a huge transformation. People take it so lightly, but it's so huge to remember this oneness of yourself. Who you are never comes and never goes. Everything which moves, everything which changes is not you. But we're currently having these human experiences, which is totally miraculous and wondrous and loving and beautiful. And the next part of this, like when there's identification, there's this belief in good and bad. That good and bad is simply a way of navigating this environment, but it doesn't hold truth in it. And people are so identified with what's good and what's bad. And when you begin to have these awakenings, you can have experiences which are so beautiful and profound, where badness is enacted and you realize there is just total and utter love. So somebody can betray you and it's just total and utter love. Somebody can steal from you and it's total utter love. But it's good on the human level that that's recognized that somebody's stealing from you. Like when you have these awakenings, that you can go through this difficult period where you have to be slapped around a bit, because it's good that you recognize if somebody's stealing of you, because that's not the appropriate way to treat people. So you can move away from that person. If you don't move away from that person, you'll like end up no nuggets, no food, no nothing, and they'll get you into trouble. So, but it's so beautiful to know that everything is love. all the bad actions and the good actions. Bad and good is simply defined by us in order to make our society work. So, you know, like in Christianity, that being gay was considered a sin. And it's most probably the reason that it's considered a sin is because it wasn't productive for the production of children. And at that time, people needed to really grow societies. I'm sure there's so much more complexities to it. You know, and inbreeding was considered sin, I think, as well. And I'm sure that's just because if people inbred, then they, you know, the kids, it wasn't good for the kids, like created deformities. But we have, like, it's in our society, if you married a cousin or a sibling or something, it would be seen as the most awful thing. It's like ooh, like really awful. But it's only because we made it up. Like, animals don't care. Like, if Khaleesi was in love with her brother, she would just be in love with her brother, you know? It would be nothing. It's less likely to happen because the dogs are smelling out like differences with their noses. So Khaleesi is really popular with the men here because her genetic body is so different from European dogs. She's from Thailand and she's not got any domesticated breeds in her, which most people think the domestication is just about whether she lives inside or not, but it doesn't. Domesticated breeds are things like Labradors, Poodles. And it doesn't mean that she's a mutt. That would include, if she was a mutt, like a crossbreed, that would be domesticated breed. That would be 2 cross domesticated breeds, but she has no domesticated breed in her. So she's not the same as like a Labrador or a Poodle or a crossbreed or anything like that. It's completely different genetics for dogs. So what I notice is that she's so popular with the boys because because of the diversity of her genes compared to European dogs and domesticated dogs. Well, what is she if she's not a domesticated breed, if she's not a poodle? You can't have a not domesticated breeds. There were dogs before domesticated breeds. I think that's only been happening 1,000 years. I'm not sure how long I think it's something like that. And some of them live on, particularly in Asian countries. Yes. So, back to the point though, I just went off on one. Like, it wouldn't be an issue. It's what we've made up, and I can feel the taboo of it. Like that's a taboo subject, but it's something we've defined. You know, monogamy is something that we've defined. Polygamy is something we've defined. You know, and there's some communities that are into polygamy, and that's like considered really bad and good. And blah, 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 blah. We've also defined porn as good or bad. Like, spiritual communities tend to be like, meh, 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 meh. Some of them aren't. Like, swinging tends to be good and bad. Like, all of these things are dependent on your viewpoint. And we don't ultimately know, really. Like, we can learn the game of society, and so if somebody's stealing for you, this isn't very good for your survival, and this is going to cause you problems so you can move away. But we've been taught, we live in a cult called this society, and we believe the cults are out there, but we're living in a cult of our society. And we believe everything, like that I'm a human, that this is a chair, that this is a computer, that is a wall. We're like, I'm driving through my world, but you've been taught all that. Like, you watch children from their parents, and the parents from such a young age, you're a boy, you're a girl, you're this, you're that, this is that. And that's great because that's how it functions, but they miss out the most important part, that who you truly are is that which you originally were before you were taught all these things of the world. So I think in Christianity as well, I'm really not versed in this, even though I was brought up in Christianity. I used to find Sunday school so boring that I was like, when I was bored by something, I couldn't learn. So Eve eats the apple of knowledge, becomes aware of her own nakedness, and I think it's also, and knows the difference between good and evil, and then gets kicked out of the Garden of Eden. So she realizes that she's naked, and she thinks that is bad, whereas before that there was just innocence. And to me, that's talking about beingness, like going back to beingness. It just sees everything as innocence, everything as pure love. Like when you're in that pure beingness, like you could say, watch a porn movie that most spiritual people would find offensive, where there's lots of swearing and dildos and screwing and fucking. And it's just seen as pure love. Whereas most educated people and people that have reflected on it and spiritual people would see that as degrading to women and violent against women. And that's true because in the sense that our society wants to evolve towards not doing that towards any women. So that's true in that sense. But actually it's also not. There's also so much more depth. So we can reflect on that and we can see it's degrading, but there's also such a bigger depth to that. It's so much more complicated, and nobody's ever doing anything. It's formation happening. That what we would see as grotesque is just as divine and beautiful as a flower emerging and arising and exploding, and the pollen going everywhere, and the bees coming and taking it in and all merging around their legs, and then them flying off, and then a big bird coming and eating up that bee. Like, it's so orgasmic, the natural ebb and flow of this life. And we take ourselves so seriously, like, you're guilty, I'm guilty, you're guilty, I'm guilty, you're guilty, I'm gay, better, worse, worse. We're so identified with it. We teach our kids in an education system that's all about competition, like whose is the better grade, and then defining that's going to lead you to a better life because you'll get more money. Who's the more intelligent? Who's the more beautiful? And it just totally misses the exquisite nature of what's happening right now. It's so exquisite. There's something so much more deeper than what the cult of our society is pushing on us. Over the last few years, I've had to watch more news than I would like because of Brexit and the other situation that's not so good if I mention it on my streams because the algorithm. The other situation where people are having to stay inside because they travel, and I need to navigate all these things, get the latest information. But it's so biased, the news, and I can see how our society is so indoctrinated by this really negative, biased perspective on society and on life. Like, our media has such effect on our society. And it's so biased, like people's view of things, and simplistic. Like, it wants to give one edge to a story. So it just goes down that edge, whereas every story is multifaceted, and you can't really do that but to get those grabbing headlines. But it's the same with all stories. Like, even the story that I'm telling, it has like a particular theme in it so we can all follow, but these are just stories in the end. Like, even me, everything, which is giving us this information, and then we view our world like that, whereas life is so much more deeper. It's so much more spectacular than the limitation of our dualistic language. Pardon me. It's like we don't know where that language is coming from. We don't know where life is coming from, appearing out of. It just is here. We say it's the past. We say it's our knowledge. We say Lisa is speaking because she chose to. But actually, it is simply appearing like magic, like that divine flower that's like growing and then rising into this big blossom. And we say it comes through time, the bees, the pollination, the growth, evolution. But actually, in this moment, right here, right now, that is simply a biased story that we're telling ourselves that fits in with our communication and our survival and our current perspective on the life. It's actually coming from unknownness, but that's so terrifying for the person that he can't even go there. Like, What is creating this now is not known, is not knowing, is no thing, not a thing. It's appearing out of that right now. It's not appearing from the past. And that is God. That is the freedom. That is the recognition that none of this is separation. It's all coming from one energy, one love, all of it, everything, no matter what someone does to you, no matter what you do to that person. It's one unbroken heart. It's not broken heart. It's only to the broken to the person that dreams that. You're dreaming your suffering, you're dreaming your reality, you're dreaming your heartache, you're dreaming your pain, and you think it's because of the outside. There is no mistake here, it's not because of the outside. Life is in perfect order and flow, good and bad, right and wrong, in all its complexities. Wow, that was a long introduction.